Long time no see again. I haven't been around for a month, but I remember right around the start of last year. Happy New Year, by the way. I made a video talking about how basically everything good about Western society was over and that a collapse was imminent. And I worried about how some of my predictions weren't quite correct, but I think it was only because I was off by a year. If there's one thing everybody's pretty aware of, it's been for the last several election years in the United States how bad things get specifically when it's an election year. It's not just political protests that turn violent that come out of nowhere. You can always expect organizations like BLM to be completely underground for every other year at least, and then in the midterms they kind of agitate again, and then in the presidential election the country fucking burns. Well, this year is a presidential election. Another thing that a lot of people find eerie is how mass shootings of the terroristic variety come out of nowhere and just really blow up again on election year. 2020 had a bunch of those, and then they were kind of quieter for a while. And I did make some videos talking about the lie that white supremacist, white male terrorism was so great and was so related to mass shooters and stuff. And I had to talk about, well, what is a mass shooting? And if you actually go by the book of what a mass shooting is, over 97% of them are committed by ethnic street gangs. So people are, even still go and say, well, no, what we mean is like political terrorists. And like, yeah, an incel shoots up a place every year or so, right? But what's always eerie, I've noticed, is when one of these white male terrorists shoots up a place, it's never a place of consequence. It's never a police station or a city hall somewhere or a news media agency. It's never anything that white men express as an enemy of themselves and their rights. It's always like a supermarket, a school, a park, a mall, and that's always odd to me. And I remember talking about several of the past white male shooters of the past 2 years, and with the exception of a couple of them, like the guy in Buffalo, who I remember talking to you guys about how his manifesto, if you had the chance to read it before it was taken down offline off the internet, was very eerie because it read like an FBI gay op, because his manifesto was about 80 pages long, and over 50 of those pages were infographics taking off of 4chan's political incorrect board, white supremacist infographics. And the majority of that 50 pages wasn't just that. It was an entire shopping list of literally everything the ATF would like you to not be able to buy online in relation to firearms. And most of those had nothing to do with the weapon he used. It was also odd that the weapons he did use were incredibly expensive and he was an 18-year-old kid without a job. Shit like that. Just eerie things that don't necessarily offer concrete evidence of a conspiracy, but just stuff that doesn't make any logical sense. And then the rest of those white male shooters actually were not male, and it's actually against YouTube terms of service to call them male because they were transgender individuals of either the MTF or FTM variety who were targeting young kids in schools. And of course, those stories get shut up really quickly. People may remember this year there was a massive controversy related to neocon YouTuber Steven Crowder releasing the manifesto of one of these transgender terrorists. And that apparently it was some sort of violation for him to release that because it was information that was known and withheld by law enforcement, but somebody had leaked it to him, and therefore there's some sort of impropriety there, even though I think anybody sane would say that the public has a right to see that information and to read it, and that the FBI and some other organizations were resistant against Freedom of Information Act requests to that information that they are legally compelled to provide. And why would they really be trying to resist that? It's not an active investigation. That particular shooter was neutralized by police on site during the shooting. There's no pending legal case or anything to try to protect. It's just, we don't want you to see what this person thinks about what? About white Western society, because this person was an egregious racist against their own upbringing, basically. It was a attack motivated against a religious institution and against white people. And in particular, is like antinatalist terrorism, because the intended explicit target was children. Um, where am I going with all this? You're going to see a lot more violence, and it's not going to be white people. And when it is, it's going to be eerie again, and it's going to be questionable. Um, in both Europe and the United States, there has been an obvious intention of the federal authorities that there is going to be no counterterrorism on a political election year whatsoever. There is going to be, of course, lockdowns on social media. So I can't really talk all that much about who I think is responsible for these lockdowns. You're going to see mayors and governors of specific states, of specific ethnic and political persuasions, that are going to basically allow it to be free reign for looters and rioters and arsonists and assault and quite possibly like 2020. It'll basically be like the purge. You'll be allowed to kill people on the street as long as you're of a specific kind of political and ethnic persuasion. We've seen from Europe that you're not allowed to talk about your concerns as a white or a natural citizen of European countries of white origin. You're not allowed to talk. Everything I say on this channel, if you're a European viewer, and I don't think there's that many of you, but there are some, you're not allowed to say the things that I am saying. And soon you'll probably not be allowed to watch. Like, it may be evidence to imprison you that your search history has a person like me or anything like me on your watching history. Because they're moving quite past what you can say to what you can listen to, and that's being controlled over there. Meanwhile, if you are of the Muslim persuasion and you're not a natural citizen of that country, you're some Syrian or some Somalian who has showed up, they won't deport you after multiple criminal offenses, and they still probably won't deport you if you run around stabbing school children. That's apparently fair game. They'll just put you in a prison, which is increasingly full of your kind of people, where, say if you were to be arrested for something a white protester might do, like throwing bacon at a mosque, you will be sent to that same prison that is full of those kind of people who will then kill you in prison. That's happened multiple times in the United Kingdom. And those people are starting to get fed up. However, when a bunch of people protest and their explicit tagline of their protest is, "We don't want school children to be stabbed by immigrants," you're a Nazi in the UK, and the entire political apparatus and the entire media apparatus will call you a Nazi. I, of course, even in America, would be considered a Nazi by most political organizations, even more independent ones like the ones on social media, because I have expressed this concern in the vein of, I am a white male person. I am in a society that was created and made wealthy by white men, and I am seeing that there is no media organization allowed. There's no political party or political candidate allowed to advocate for me, and some may hint that they might, like a Donald Trump, and some of the newer wave Republicans might express some interest, at least in the patriotism of my country, but none of them are going to come right out and say that people like me are being maligned by a multi-trillion-dollar apparatus made up of media, entertainment, record producers, bankers. People are being debanked. I made a video that I wish more of you watched last year that had to do with censorship of the internet and how that is the last frontier of warfare, and that once the media has successfully usurped the internet, which they are actively doing, that what you've seen in all corporation type shit, all media type shit, is something people acknowledge there, but are afraid to acknowledge when it or talk about specifically when it comes to the internet, which is that what's wrong with media? Well, all movies are made by like 4 studios, and those 4 studios also own all the TV channels and also own all the TV news corporations, and they control what you can talk about. It's like AOL, Time Warner, Disney even owns Fox now, by the way, and just a couple other companies. And none of those people are staffed by anybody who likes you and cares about you. If you look anything like me, if you think anything like me, and you don't even look like me, you might be of a different gender, you might even be of a different race. But if you think anything like me about what's best for society, which is old ideals that were championed almost exclusively by white men throughout history, and then for a short period in the 20th century were championed by all sorts of people, and then they just suddenly were strangulated towards the end of the 19th and early, or excuse me, end of the 20th and early 21st century. And now there is a different ethnic group who owns the overwhelming majority of everything, all the means of production, all the means of money, all the means of lending, all the means of information dissemination, and those people are actively hostile to us. If you're wondering why do certain persuasions of people, why they are allowed to commit rampant and wanton terrorism, arson, murder, assault, grand theft, all that shit, and just get away with it. And these same people are now in the judicial situation saying, I'm now the district attorney of this area, and it's no cash bond for everything up to second-degree murder. And if they steal a bunch of your shit, you just have to deal with it. No, a bunch of these corporations who are also owned by people that I think are my enemy are leaving those areas because they can't even make any money, because the level of destruction and disorganization and demoralization and has gotten so extreme that people who have a monopoly on industries like convenience stores, people have a monopoly of industry on things like businesses like Walgreens and CVS and those kind of corner stores, and people who have a monopoly on businesses like even Walmart and Target and Albertsons or whatever the grocery store is, the grocery chain in your area. They're all leaving these towns, and these towns are all talking about, oh, we're a food desert and we all get price gouged, and it's because of racism. No, it's because a specific demographic of your city is completely unrestricted criminals who get to do whatever they want and face no legal consequences, therefore making it impossible for any business that can come in and have the money and the infrastructure to reduce prices. Why is Walmart so cheap? Because they're a monopoly. Why is Walmart so cheap? Because they make so many sales, they can cover the overhead that comes from normal levels of shoplifting, or and they're so powerful and so wealthy and can make such big stores where everything's available that they can snuff out competition from smaller, more niche stores. But if you're allowed to run in there with a ski mask and a trash bag and fill multiple of these trash bags with whatever merchandise you want and leave, and no one will stop you, and the police won't look for you, and the district attorney of your city will not prosecute you, basically, it's like I said, the purge. Theft, grand theft is legal in these cities. There is no governmental or law enforcement recourse against this crime. Therefore, this crime is rampant because it's free money, it's free merchandise. And there is a large percentage of the population of these cities that sees no moral reason to not rob a store when you can do it and get away with it scot-free, and not just have all that stuff you stole for yourself, but you can sell it on a black market a block away on the street corner from this store that you robbed, and nobody will do a fucking thing about it. And you can sell this shit for 50% off and make a massive profit because you paid for none of that inventory. So, I don't mean to go on and on and on about every single problem, but I will tell you that you're in an environment where The only reason why you can hear me say this to you is because of how small I am, because I'm not monetized and have no intention of being monetized, and because I'm very careful with my words. But anybody who's more open about their feelings and about their advocacy for themselves and what they look like and the people who are like them and the culture that they are a part of that people like to pretend doesn't exist. Yes, white culture apparently isn't even real to the overwhelming majority of academia. We're nothing but parasites who just exist in luxury. We're all plantation owners from 1859, and we're all super wealthy, and everything we have was built directly off the backs of criminally exploiting people. And that is all that you are to not just a lot of academia. A lot of people are willing to say that, but you're that to a large number of federal Senate politicians and parliamentarians in Europe and whatever the fuck you have, a PM or whatever. A lot of those people think a delusional lie about the majority of their constituents. And where are you at right now? Well, part of the reason why all these countries are being flooded with minorities, whether it's Hispanics coming in from Mexico and South America and the United States, to Muslims and various Africans and Middle Easterners being flooded into Europe, it's because when you bring these people in and you let them vote, they only vote for the people who give them free shit. They only vote for essentially what lets them steal from the more successful and affluent members of their society, which will be white people. And when you have a welfare state, that will increasingly become unpopular with your constituents of this state that pay taxes. Because, again, the government doesn't have money, it doesn't make money, it doesn't have anything. What it has is what it takes from the productive members of its society. And if you have a welfare state where it increasingly becomes upwards of half of the country is non-productive and only takes, and half the country is productive and has to give between 30 and 65% of their profits of any labor they do to the state, for that state to piss it on things that do not benefit them. Because we have this illusion, oh, the state funds schools. The schools are complete shit right now. The worst thing you can do to a child, if you have a young child right now, is to put them in public school anywhere in Europe or in the United States. That is an egregious thing to do to your child. You're dooming them to learn nothing and to be abused by peers and by the authority figures in the school as things become increasingly traumatic. Unheard of levels of sexual violence and physical violence and gang activity are occurring in all sorts of schools in places you wouldn't even imagine that would be occurring. It's not just places like Baltimore, Washington, D.C. or Atlanta or something. That's happening all over the country. And it's increasingly radicalizing the youth, regardless of their ethnicity, to start behaving and to glorify the culture of the worst ethnic criminals in that area. And that's a white supremacist thing to say, except for it's true. Okay, you can call it racist or bigoted or whatever, but it's factually true. And it is a massive problem that is harming all sorts of people, including the ethnicities that I'm accusing of being complicit in this criminal activity. They would be better off not participating in that and not being a product of that system. So I'm actually advocating on their behalf as well. But of course, just because I'm saying, hey, look, they're being utilized as a demoralizing and destabilizing force in the society, they're not just being used to criminally terrorize the population. They're also being brought in because they are dependent on welfare, and there's one political party that says, I will give you anything. The other guy's going to promise you, the right wing's going to promise you all sorts of welfare, but I will promise you literally millions of dollars. New York and California are both trying to say we'd like to give every black citizen, of course, who are at least 4 generations removed from slavery, $5 million in reparations, in apology for the crime of slavery that occurred 4 generations ago. Where do they even going to get that money? These are already massive welfare states where the white population of these states has paid tens of trillions of dollars, not just to blacks in America, but in the total aid given to the entire continent of Africa since 1950 is like $40 trillion. Did you know that? $40 trillion. And what does Africa look like? Clearly subsidizing people who don't do so well for themselves in the interest of bringing them up. It doesn't work. There are some levels of the global society where they have sort of a maximal level of civilization, and you can piss unthinkable, uncountable, literally unimaginable amounts of money into these cultures and achieve very little. And what you do achieve only is achieved because there are people from white Western society that are out there facilitating those areas. And when those people leave, those areas devolve back to the state they were prior to the arrival of these Western influences, regardless of whether they're still receiving millions of dollars or not. So welfare is a fool's errand, but it's used because, here's the big rub, and I'll end with this because I didn't want to talk to you for at least not more than 30 minutes, is it literally has come down to you need to import more people to vote against the basic white, middle, and upper class levels of the society, because in order for these governments to continue their criminal corruption, and the United States government as well as the EU and the parliaments within that EU are all absolutely criminal. They're all a gang. They're all a mafia. They're all money launderers, money washers, and war criminals. Because if you think, oh, just because they don't run around shooting people in the street like a Cosa Nostra gang or something, that means they're not actually a mafia criminal. No, they kill people. It's called war. And the war is almost always economically motivated, not motivated by survival. You may have heard all sorts of propaganda about what's going on in Israel and Ukraine and interpreted those as a matter of survival, when it's not true. It's not true. It's a matter of land and resources and money. And what did the opportunity become once those wars started? Well, all the Western, give us money, and then we will, misappropriate it and line our pockets with it. And you can sell us arms too, and we'll turn around and sell those arms to Islamic and African terrorists. And now you have people running around in all sorts of places, including Palestine, using American and European manufactured arms that were sold to them by Ukrainian criminals. So it becomes just a great big scam. Even war that costs tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives has become a criminal financial enterprise. That's the society you look at. And how do the people who consider operating this way, the people who are anti-nationalists, the people who are isolationists, the people who tell you, well, we are basically bankrupting our own societies to fund criminal dysfunction across the world, can't we bring our interests back into actually funding our society? Because America could be a glorious welfare state if it stopped pissing money outside of itself in military and criminal and financial aid enterprises. If we kept all that money, there's a lot more we could subsidize. Even though I don't advocate for that kind of society or economic model, it would work a lot better if the money wasn't thrown around willy-nilly by like idiots with a fucking bomb just blowing the money in random directions with no real clear rhyme or reason to where that money is going, besides kill more people and launder more cash and fund more insider trading so that all these politicians can get rich on making over 100 times more than their congressional salary and never get investigated by the SEC or anybody, right? But that only works because, look, there's only two kinds of people who really vote Democrat. You may see online all sorts of people, and in social media, make sure that you see so many white men who are advocating for a more socialist, a far leftist, a more welfare state, literally just socialist. Just the government controls all the money and the government spends the money wherever it wants, is what socialism is. A lot of people want to attribute that to communism or to Bolshevism. It's not exactly what's going on here. The so-called commies or the Marxists are socialists. They want to create a centralized government state that controls all money and where it goes and what it's spent on, and eventually controls what you buy. And just basically all economic force is centralized. The money is controlled by the government. The lending is controlled by the government. The industry is controlled by the government. That's what we're trending towards. Those people do not get voted for by white men. They get voted for by ethnic minorities that depend on welfare and by white women who are drastically politically uninterested and politically uneducated. And they're just compelled by their emotions of we should give to the less fortunate with no concern about what we give, who we take that from to give, and how it's spent, and to vet any organization for lack of a scam or fraud. None of that is of any interest to the white woman liberal voter. It's just a matter of emotional appeal. Oh, we can't vote for Donald Trump because of mean tweets. What's his platform? I have no idea. I don't care. Mean tweets. And this Joe Biden guy, what's his economic platform? What's his goals? What's his history? I don't care. He says nice things about giving to the less fortunate. Vote for that guy. If you removed white women from the equation, white men still have the ability to completely outstrip every single Democrat voter in every single district of the fucking United States, except for like ones that are 80+% ethnically African American, or ethnically Hispanic, although some of those are starting to vote more right wing too, because the Hispanic flood has been going on for so long in the United States that there are 2 to 3 generations now of actually naturalized born United States citizens who have a social security number and a state ID, and they pay taxes and they have businesses. And once you start paying taxes and you're not just a leech on society, you start to realize how fucked the system is. And you're actually starting to have, and this is part of why the flood of impoverished from the third world has to continue, because at least up to now, and this can't continue forever, there are generations after of that flood who actually become productive members of society 2, 3, 4 generations later, after being a drain of trillions of dollars, and their ancestors have been, that eventually start paying taxes. And the second you start paying taxes, your voting goes another way. So what you have is one political party that only represents the most hyper rich organizations in the country, the bankers, the hedge fund managers, the big tech CEOs. That's what the Democrats represent. And on the other end of the spectrum, the only other thing that they fucking represent are the most impoverished and in need of free shit. In the way that they advocate to both of these things is by protecting criminals, because the criminal situation, at least in the United States, is massively ethnic. And I would argue is the same in Europe, that it's a massive ethnic divide. White people are not the ultra wealthy. You may have been told that the ultra wealthy big tech CEOs and bankers and whatnot are white people. They are not. They are another ethnicity that is not okay to talk about on YouTube, that has pale skin but are not white people, just so you know. And then they're also representing another end of the spectrum that are, again, not productive white people. You have the people who are so rich that they can't possibly care where money goes, and the people who are so poor and so ethnically insular that they're definitely interested in taking from what the right wing represents, or is supposed to, and mostly doesn't. Okay, don't think that this is a nakedly conservative endorsement, because it's not, because the conservatives do a very piss poor job of representing the remainder, which is the actual backbone and the economic force and the major taxpayer of this country, which is the white middle class, the people in the middle who are white people. And they are being very poorly represented by only one side of this country. And that side of this country still, when it comes to election time, wants to appeal to who? Because the demographic replacement has been so severe that they can't just come out and say, we are the party of the white middle class who pays all the taxes. They have to say, oh, I also will make sure that there's still Gibbs for all these black people, because they've been flooded into all these districts that didn't used to be white or didn't used to have any minorities in a period 30 years ago. We have to make sure we appeal to those. We have to make sure that we're not going to take away your Gibbs. We're just going to restructure the welfare system so that it puts less burden on the middle class. And then they kind of do that a little bit. And they mostly do that by flooding the top. It's literally Reaganomics, trickle-down economics. And it does work, not as well as it could, but it does work to promote the top of industry so much that the wealth does trickle down, because that does trickle down. When the best, who at least are members of industries that do employ a lot of people, and that does not count big tech, employs a few thousand people and controls trillions of dollars. And so that's wealth hoarded to a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of the society, and does not pay back into that society at all, and controls what? Entertainment, okay? For actual industry, it does work that when everything from a retail store to a steel manufacturer, something that employs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and they are kept their business in the United States and not in China and not in Taiwan and not in Mexico and not in El Salvador and not in the Dominican Republic and not in Africa, okay, if these people can actually bring industry back in the United States and start hiring people, that money does come down, because it has to, by the model of the business. I hope you're still paying attention, because this is just as important as the shit I started with. Okay, but if you're still taxing the shit out of that middle class to subsidize the criminal corruption that is called a welfare state, and the money barely even trickles down to the actual intended super impoverished ethnic minority, okay, that money is pissed into government stuff, like fighting the homeless situation that is an epidemic that doubles and triples every fucking year in, say, San Francisco or Seattle. It is a $10 million business minimum in each individual city to staff these government organizations that pay six-figure salaries to people who are supposed to figure out the problem. Well, if the problem is worth $10 million a year and the solution to the problem is worth nothing, do you expect that to actually be solved? If the fucking homeless problem goes away, the people who make $10 million off of treating that problem stop making $10 million a year, and they're out of a job. They have no incentive to solve the problem. None. Which is why it's rampant in all these left-wing societies, because a lot of these charities and this welfare doesn't even go to the people that people resent for receiving it. It doesn't go to the poor blacks and poor Hispanics and the homeless. And no, it doesn't. It goes back into the government that is a fraudulent criminal mafia. So if you're wondering why 2024 is going to be bad, in summary, if I still have your attention, which analytics show I don't, but for those of you who are still watching, go ahead, dice this up and clip this video into what you think is more relevant bits, and repost it, re-upload it on Rumble or BitChute or wherever the fuck that you hang out, because a lot of the people who watch my shit are on alternate text sites. I encourage you, cut up my shit, repost it. It's not copyrighted. It's not monetized. I'm not a business or an LLC. I want you, if you don't repost my shit and you don't watch my shit, I want you, if you do listen to my shit at least, to express my ideas. And they don't even have to have my face on them. You literally plagiarize the words out of my mouth. I want you to. And go post it on your shit. Okay? Because the message is what matters. And that's all I give a shit about. I have no financial or personal self-worth or esteem investment in this process. I do this for the purposes of my own sanity, so I know that at least somebody out there is aware of the complete fraud and fuckery, the complete joke and clown circus that society has become, and how it's only going to get worse because the entire society is on your back. And once your back gives out, once the straw has snapped your spine, camel, everything collapses, because it's all a great big fraud that's built out of bilking and stealing and milking you like cattle. And oftentimes by people whose religion, their holy book, describes you and your entire ethnicity as a word that translates into English directly as cattle. Just so you know,